The crack of a leather whip against wooden slats sent splinters flying as Sophia Fletcher flinched beneath the wagon tarp. Her wrists chafed raw from the rope binding them together. It was 1875 in the untamed Kansas territory, and she had become nothing more than merchandise, bought and paid for, now being transported to her new owner, like cattle to slaughter. "Keep quiet in there," barked the trader who called himself Dawson. "Another day's ride, and you'll fetch me a fine price at Miller's Ranch. Those gold miners pay good money for pretty things like you." Sophia bit her lip to keep from crying. Just 3 months ago, she had been a shopkeeper's daughter in Boston, with dreams as wide as the horizon. After her parents succumbed to influenza, leaving nothing but debts, the advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like providence. Respectable gentlemen seeking brides in the Western Territories. Passage provided. She had written to a man calling himself Gerald Miller, exchanged a few proper letters, and boarded the westbound train with hope in her heart. The hope had died when she arrived in Kansas City, and was met not by a gentleman farmer, but by Dawson and his 2 associates. They had seized her luggage, her identification papers, and finally, her freedom. She wasn't the only one. 5 other women had been collected and transported west in this covered wagon, sold off one by one at various mining camps and remote settlements. Now she was the last one left. Sophia shifted uncomfortably on the hard wagon floor. Her once fine blue traveling dress was soiled and torn, her auburn hair matted from weeks without proper washing. She had tried escaping twice. The first attempt earned her the rope bindings. The second earned her the bruise that still discolored her left cheek. The wagon jolted to a sudden stop, and Sophia heard men's voices outside unfamiliar ones. Her heart raced. Was this Miller's ranch? Was she about to be sold to some grizzled old miner or worse? "That's a mighty fine horse you've got there, mister," came Dawson's voice, overly friendly in a way that made her skin crawl. "You heading to Miller's place too?" A deep voice answered, calm and measured. "Just passing through. Heading north to Fort Smith." "Well, you ought to stop by Miller's first. Having a big gathering tonight. Drinks, cards, and I'm delivering some special merchandise." Dawson's laugh made Sophia's stomach turn. There was a pause. Then the stranger spoke again. "What kind of merchandise requires a tarp and ropes?" Sophia's breath caught. The stranger had noticed something was wrong. "Nothing that concerns you, Cowboy," snapped one of Dawson's men. The silence that followed felt charged, dangerous. Then the stranger's voice again. "I'd like to see what you're transporting." "And I'd like to see you ride on and mind your own business," Dawson replied, his tone hardening. Sophia heard the metallic click of a gun being cocked. "I'm making it my business," said the stranger. What followed was a blur of shouting, a gunshot that made her jump, and then sudden commotion. The tarp was yanked away, flooding the wagon with blinding sunlight. Sophia squinted, her eyes adjusting to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright sky. "Jesus," the man muttered, holstering his pistol as he took in the sight of her bound, bruised, and filthy. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with dark hair and serious eyes beneath the brim of a well-worn cowboy hat. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but even in her terrified state, Sophia could tell he wasn't the rough sort that populated most of the frontier towns she'd passed through. "Madam, are you hurt?" he asked, reaching into the wagon. Before she could answer, he had pulled a knife from his boot and cut her bindings. The relief in her wrists was immediate, but Sophia remained frozen, unsure if this rescue was real or if she was simply being transferred to another captor. "I'm Jacob O'Malley," he said, offering his hand to help her down. "And you're not going to Miller's Ranch." Sophia looked past him to see Dawson and his 2 men sitting on the ground, hands raised as a second cowboy older, with a silver-streaked beard kept them covered with a rifle. "Where are the others?" Jacob demanded of Dawson. "What others?" Dawson spat. "The other women. Jacob said, his voice dangerously quiet. I've been tracking rumors of missing mail-order brides for months. There's a wanted poster with your face on it in 3 territories. Dawson's face paled beneath his sunburn. Already sold 'em off. Too late for them. Sophia found her voice at last. He's lying. He's taking me to a man named Miller, who runs some kind of operation selling women to minors. Jacob's jaw tightened. Miller's on my list too. He turned to his companion, Hank. We need to get to the ranch before they realize something's wrong. What about these vermin? Hank asked, gesturing with his rifle toward the captors. Jacob considered for a moment. Tie them up. We'll collect them on our way back. He looked at Sophia. Madam, I know you've been through hell, but I need your help. Miller's expecting a delivery, and we're going to give him one, but not the kind he's expecting. Sophia stared at him, this stranger who had just cut her bonds. She had no reason to trust any man after what she'd been through, but something in Jacob O'Malley's steady gaze made her think he might be different. My name is Sophia Fletcher, she said, lifting her chin despite her disheveled appearance. And I'm done being bought and sold. Jacob's expression softened slightly. Miss Fletcher, I promise you're not merchandise anymore. Within an hour, Dawson and his men were securely bound and hidden in a ravine, and Sophia found herself riding beside Jacob toward Miller's ranch, wearing a clean shirt and pants from Hank's saddlebag that were far too large, but infinitely preferable to her ruined dress. Jacob had explained that he was a former Texas Ranger, now working with a federal marshal to break up the bride trafficking ring that had been operating across the frontier. How many women have they taken? She asked as they rode. Dozens, Jacob replied grimly. They advertise in Eastern newspapers as marriage brokers, collect money from both the women seeking husbands and the men supposedly seeking wives, then sell the women to the highest bidders, usually isolated mining camps where women are scarce. And the men who think they're getting proper brides? Most never exist, just names they use to lure women west. Sophia felt ill. What will happen to the other women? The ones already sold? Jacob's expression darkened. First we deal with Miller, then we go after every last place he's sold to. He looked over at her. But you don't need to be part of that. Once we reach the next proper town, we can arrange safe passage east for you. The thought of returning east brought no comfort. Her parents were gone, their modest home claimed by creditors. There was nothing waiting for her in Boston but poverty and shame. What if I don't want to go back? She asked quietly. Jacob looked surprised. Miss Fletcher. I came west for a new life, she interrupted. Not to be treated like livestock, certainly, but I made a choice to leave Boston behind. That hasn't changed. He studied her for a long moment. Let's get through today first. Then you can decide what comes next. As the sun began to set, they crested a hill and spotted Miller's ranch in the valley below, a sprawling property with a main house, several outbuildings, and a large barn that glowed with lantern light. Horses were hitched outside, and the sounds of men's laughter drifted up on the evening breeze. Looks like the party's already started, Hank muttered. Jacob nodded grimly. Miller sells to the highest bidder. These gatherings are auctions disguised as social events. He turned to Sophia. You don't have to do this. Hank and I can handle it. Sophia swallowed hard, staring down at the ranch. The fear was still there, knotting her stomach. But so was something else, rage at what had been done to her and the other women. What's your plan? She asked. I go in as a buyer. Hank stays outside with the horses for a quick escape. You stay hidden until... No, Sophia interrupted. They're expecting a delivery, a woman. They won't let you in without merchandise. Jacob frowned. I'm not using you as bait. You're not using me. I'm volunteering. She met his gaze steadily. I want to see Miller's face when he realizes his business is finished. They argued for several minutes, but in the end, Jacob reluctantly agreed to a modified plan. Sophia would ride in with him, appearing to be his captive, but she would be armed with a small Derringer pistol hidden in her boot. At the first sign of trouble, she was to find cover while Jacob and Hank, who would be watching from outside, dealt with Miller and his men. As they approached the ranch, Jacob gently bound Sophia's wrists with a loose rope that she could easily slip free from. "Remember," he whispered, "at the first sign of trouble, you get behind something solid." She nodded, her heart pounding as they rode into the yard. Men lounging on the porch eyed them with interest, particularly Sophia. She kept her gaze down, playing the part of the broken captive, while inwardly cataloging every face, every potential threat. A heavy-set man with a thick mustache and expensive clothes emerged from the main house. "You're not Dawson," he said suspiciously. "Dawson ran into some trouble," Jacob replied smoothly. "Asked me to make his delivery. Said you'd pay well." The man Miller, she presumed, approached and roughly tilted Sophia's face up to examine her. It took every ounce of will not to flinch away from his touch. "Bit roughed up," Miller commented, "but she'll clean up nice. The miners don't mind a little spirit as long as it can be broken." He grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Come inside. We've got about a dozen gentlemen tonight ready to bid. You'll get your cut." Inside the main house, Sophia's worst fears were confirmed. The large front room had been arranged with chairs facing a small platform as stage for the auction. Men of various ages sat drinking and smoking, their eyes lighting up with interest as Miller led Sophia in. "Gentlemen," Miller announced, "we have an unexpected addition to tonight's entertainment, a genuine Boston lady for your consideration." He turned to Jacob. "Get her up on the platform, let them see what they're bidding on." Jacob guided Sophia up the 2 steps, his hand on her arm communicating a gentle squeeze of reassurance. He was playing his part well, the opportunistic transporter, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. Miller addressed the crowd. "We'll start the bidding at $50. Remember, gentlemen, this isn't just any dance hall girl. This is educated, Eastern stock. Think of the refinement she'll bring to your home." The bidding started immediately, hands raising around the room. $50, $60, $75. Sophia forced herself to remain still, watching the faces of the men who thought they could purchase her life and body for the price of a good horse. "100, called a gray-haired miner from the back. "120, countered a younger man with a cruel smile. "150, said a third. Miller was grinning broadly now, delighted with the high bids. Jacob remained beside Sophia, his hand never leaving her arm, his body positioned to move quickly when needed. The bidding continued, escalating rapidly as the men grew more excited and competitive. When it reached $300, Miller held up his hands. Gentlemen, I think we need to see a bit more of what we're bidding on." He turned to Sophia with a leer. "Remove your shirt, girl." A cold rage washed over Sophia. This was the moment. She looked at Jacob and gave him the slightest nod. "I have a counteroffer," Jacob said loudly, his voice cutting through the room. In one fluid motion, he drew his revolver. "Everyone stays exactly where they are, and maybe you all live to see morning." Chaos erupted. Men leaped to their feet, reaching for weapons. Sophia yanked her hands free of the loose bindings and pulled the Derringer from her boot. A shot rang out from outside Hank, right on schedule, followed by the sound of breaking glass as he fired through a window. "Federal Marshals!" Jacob shouted. "This operation is finished!" Miller lunged for a shotgun propped against the wall. Sophia didn't hesitate. She aimed the Derringer and fired, the small gun kicking in her hand. Miller howled as the bullet tore through his shoulder, the shotgun clattering to the floor. Jacob had his gun trained on the crowd. "Next man who draws dies where he stands." Whether it was Jacob's deadly calm tone or the realization that they were facing lawmen, the fight went out of the room. Men raised their hands, backing away from their weapons. Hank burst through the front door, rifle at the ready. "Got two running out back," he reported. "Shot one in the leg." What followed was a blur of activity: securing prisoners, confiscating weapons, searching the property. In a back room, they found ledgers detailing every sale Miller had made over the past 2 years. Names, locations, prices paid for women who had come west seeking marriage and found only slavery. "This is everything we need," Jacob said grimly, paging through the books. "Names, dates, locations. We can track down every woman they sold." As the night wore on, Sophia found a quiet corner of the porch to sit and gather her thoughts. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky but strangely calm. Jacob found her there, offering a cup of coffee. "You did well in there," he said, sitting beside her. "That shot probably saved lives." She accepted the coffee, warming her hands around the tin cup. "I've never shot anyone before." "Most people haven't." He paused. "Are you all right?" The question was simple, but Sophia found she couldn't answer it easily. Was she all right? Would she ever be, after what she'd experienced? "I will be," she finally replied. "What happens now?" "There's a town about 20 miles north Riverton, proper town with a sheriff's office and a telegraph. We'll take Miller and his men there, send wires to the federal authorities." He hesitated. "After that, well, the offer still stands. We can arrange passage back east for you." Sophia looked out at the darkened landscape. The West had not been kind to her, but there was something about its vastness, its possibility, that still called to her. "I think I'd like to stay," she said slowly. "Not here, obviously, but somewhere in the West. Start fresh." Jacob nodded, studying her with those serious eyes. "If that's what you want, I'll help you find somewhere safe." "What will you do? After Miller is dealt with?" "Continue the hunt. There are more operations like his, more women who need to be found." He looked down at his coffee. "It's not work that ever really ends." They fell into a comfortable silence, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. Sophia felt something shift between them, a connection formed through danger and shared purpose. "Thank you," she said softly, "for finding me, for treating me like a person, not property." Jacob's expression softened. "You never were property, Miss Fletcher. Not for a single moment, no matter what those men tried to make you believe." In that moment, with those simple words, Sophia felt something inside her begin to heal. Dawn broke over the plains as their unusual caravan headed north toward Riverton. Jacob and Hank had rounded up Miller and his associates, binding them securely to their horses. The ledgers and other evidence were packed safely in saddlebags. Sophia rode beside Jacob, wearing proper clothes again, a simple dress found in Miller's storage, likely intended for one of his merchandise before sale. "Riverton's a decent town," Jacob told her as they rode. "Good people. They have a hotel where you can stay while we sort things out with the authorities." "And then?" Sophia asked. "And then you decide what comes next. No one else." The promise of choice, of controlling her own destiny, felt almost intoxicating after weeks of captivity. Sophia found herself studying Jacob's profile as they rode, noting the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, the set of his shoulders that spoke of responsibility carried for too long alone. They reached Riverton by mid-morning, causing quite a stir as they rode down the main street with their bound prisoners. The sheriff, a balding man named Pearson, emerged from his office with wide eyes. "O'Malley, what in tarnation have you brought me?" Jacob dismounted, speaking quietly to the sheriff while Hank kept watch over the prisoners. Sophia overheard fragments. "Bride trafficking, federal case, need to send telegrams." Sheriff Pearson's face darkened as he understood. He approached Sophia with a respectful nod. "Madam, I'm sorry for what you've endured. We'll see these men face justice." "Thank you, Sheriff," she replied, finding strength in her voice that surprised her. The next few hours were a whirlwind. The prisoners were locked in the town jail. Jacob sent telegrams to federal authorities in 3 territories. Hank departed to retrieve Dawson and his men from where they'd left them bound. The sheriff's wife, a kind, motherly woman named Martha, took Sophia under her wing, providing a bath, clean clothes, and a hot meal at their home behind the sheriff's office. "You poor dear," Martha kept saying, clucking her tongue at Sophia's still visible bruises. "But you're safe now, and from what my husband says, you helped capture some very bad men." After washing away weeks of grime and fear, Sophia felt almost reborn. Standing before a mirror in borrowed clothes, her auburn hair clean and combed, she hardly recognized herself. The woman staring back at her was thinner, her eyes carrying shadows they hadn't before. But there was also a newfound strength in her gaze. She returned to the sheriff's office to find Jacob poring over Miller's ledgers with Sheriff Pearson. "There are at least 30 women we can identify," Jacob was saying, "sold to mining camps and remote ranches across 3 territories." "And you plan to find them all?" the sheriff asked, sounding doubtful. "Every last one," Jacob confirmed, his tone leaving no room for argument. He looked up as Sophia entered, his expression softening. "Miss Fletcher, you look recovered." She smiled slightly at his awkwardness. "Amazing what soap and clean clothes can do. Have you had any response to your telegrams?" "Federal marshals will be here in 3 days. Until then, Sheriff Pearson has agreed to hold the prisoners." He hesitated. "I've also made arrangements for you at the hotel. Best room they have." "That's very kind, but—" "It's the least I can do," he interrupted. "After what you've been through." Sheriff Pearson excused himself to check on the prisoners, leaving them alone in the office. "What will you do now?" Sophia asked. "Wait for the marshals?" Jacob shook his head. Too much time would be lost. According to Miller's ledgers, there's a mining camp 50 miles west of here, Copper Ridge. He sold 3 women there just last month. He met her gaze directly. "I'm leaving at first light tomorrow." Sophia felt a strange pang at the thought of him leaving. This man who had rescued her, who had treated her with respect, when others had treated her as merchandise in just 2 days, he had become her anchor in a world turned upside down. "Take me with you," she said suddenly. Jacob looked startled. "That's out of the question. It's dangerous work, and you've been through enough already." "Those women will be frightened, confused. They'll trust another woman more readily than a man with a badge and a gun." She stepped closer. "I know what they've experienced, Jacob. I can help them in ways you can't." "Miss Fletcher." "Sophia," she corrected. "After everything, I think you can call me Sophia." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Sophia, then. I can't ask you to put yourself in danger again." "You're not asking. I'm offering." She held his gaze steadily. "Those women deserve their freedom, just as I've regained mine. Let me help them find it." Jacob studied her for a long moment, conflict evident in his expression. Finally, he sighed. "You're not what I expected when I cut those ropes yesterday." "I'm not what I expected either," she admitted. "But I think perhaps that's not a bad thing." And so it was decided. Sophia would accompany Jacob to Copper Ridge, helping to rescue the women sold there before continuing on to the next location in Miller's ledger. Sheriff Pearson's wife provided Sophia with more practical clothing for the journey-riding skirts, sturdy boots, and a warm coat for the mountain nights. That evening, as Sophia prepared for bed in her hotel room, she found herself reflecting on the strange turn her life had taken. She had left Boston seeking a husband and a new beginning. The husband hadn't materialized, at least, not in the way she'd expected, but perhaps the new beginning still could. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Jacob standing awkwardly in the hallway, hat in hand. "I apologize for disturbing you," he said formally, but there's something I need to say before we leave tomorrow." She invited him in, leaving the door properly ajar for propriety's sake. He remained standing, turning his hat in his hands. "I've been thinking about our arrangement," he began, "and I need to be clear about something. This work is dangerous. The men who run these operations won't surrender easily." "I understand the risks," she assured him. "I believe you do," he said, surprising her. "But what I need you to understand is that your safety will be my priority. If at any point I believe you're in genuine danger, I'll need you to follow my instructions without question, even if that means leaving me behind." Sophia felt a chill at his words. "You expect trouble at Copper Ridge?" "I expect trouble everywhere we go," he replied honestly. "These men are making fortunes selling women. They won't give that up without a fight." She nodded slowly. "I'll follow your lead. But the same applies to you, Jacob. No unnecessary risks." A small smile touched his lips. "I've been told I'm rather cautious by nature." "Somehow I doubt that," she replied, returning his smile. "A cautious man wouldn't have confronted 3 armed men to rescue a stranger." "Perhaps you bring out the reckless in me," he said, and for a moment, something warmed in his eyes before he quickly looked away. "We leave at dawn. Try to get some rest." After he left, Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, her thoughts in turmoil. She was committing herself to a dangerous mission with a man she barely knew, yet somehow trusted completely. More confusing were the feelings stirring inside her, feelings she had no business harboring for a man who saw her as nothing more than someone to protect, a victim to rescue. Yet as she finally drifted to sleep, it was Jacob's face she saw not as her rescuer, but as a man who had awakened something in her she thought had died in that wagon. The journey to Copper Ridge took 2 days of hard riding through increasingly rugged territory. Sophia surprised Jacob with her endurance, never complaining despite the difficult terrain and long hours in the saddle. They made camp each night beneath the stars, maintaining a respectful distance but sharing stories over the campfire. Jacob told her of his childhood in Texas, his years as a ranger, and how he'd come to work with the federal marshals tracking bride traffickers after his own sister had nearly fallen victim to such a scheme. "She was lucky," he explained, staring into the fire. "The man who arranged her passage west turned out to be legitimate, but while she was traveling, she met other women who weren't so fortunate. When I visited her in Colorado, she told me about them. I started asking questions, following rumors. And that led you to Dawson and Miller," Sophia concluded. He nodded. "They're just parts of a larger network. Behind them are men with money and influence who never get their hands dirty. Those are the ones I really want." "Will the ledgers help identify them?" "I hope so." Miller was meticulous about recording payments and shipments. His mouth twisted in disgust at the terminology. But careful men like that often use codes, false names. Sophia wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders, gazing up at the vast sweep of stars. "I never imagined the West would be like this. In Boston, we read about frontier opportunities, new beginnings. No one mentioned the darkness beneath." "There's darkness everywhere," Jacob said quietly. "But there's light, too." He looked at her across the fire. "People who fight back. People like you." The warmth that spread through her at his words had nothing to do with the fire. They reached Copper Ridge the following afternoon, a ramshackle mining settlement clinging to a mountainside, with a main street consisting of little more than a general store, a saloon, and a collection of crude cabins. Men in dirt-covered clothes moved between buildings, eyeing the newcomers with suspicion. Jacob and Sophia had prepared their story carefully. They would pose as siblings searching for their cousin, one of the women sold to the camp according to Miller's ledger. Jacob wore his badge hidden beneath his coat, his gun visible at his hip. "Remember," he murmured as they rode into town, "let me do most of the talking. These men won't take kindly to outsiders asking questions." The saloon seemed the logical place to start. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. Conversations paused as they entered, all eyes turning to Sophia, clearly the first respectable woman to cross that threshold in some time. Jacob approached the bar, his manner casual but alert. "Whiskey," he told the barkeeper, sliding a coin across the scarred wood. "And information, if you're selling that too." The barkeeper, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, poured the drink. "Information costs more than whiskey, stranger." Jacob placed another coin on the bar. "Looking for my cousin. Name's Mary Edwards. Heard she came out this way a month or so back." "Married one of your miners." The barkeeper's expression didn't change, but Sophia noticed how his eyes flicked briefly toward a table in the corner where 3 men sat playing cards. "Don't know any Mary," he said flatly. "Not many women in Copper Ridge." "That's strange," Jacob replied, his tone still conversational. "Man named Miller in Riverton said he arranged 3 marriages here recently, charged a fair price for the introductions." The tension in the room thickened. One of the card players, a lean, hard-faced man with a deputy's star pinned to his vest, stood and approached. "You're asking a lot of questions, mister," he said. "We don't much care for that here." Jacob turned, casually resting his hand near his holster. "Just looking for family. My sister here is worried sick about our cousin." The deputy's eyes slid to Sophia, his gaze insolent. "Your sister, huh? Pretty thing. We don't get many like her in Copper Ridge." "And that's why we're concerned about Mary," Sophia interjected, ignoring Jacob's warning look. "Family takes care of its own out here. We just want to make sure she's all right. If she came to Copper Ridge, she belongs to Copper Ridge now," the deputy said with a smirk. "Just like anything else a man buys and pays for." Jacob's hand tightened on his glass, but his voice remained steady. "No one belongs to anyone, friend. Those days are over." The deputy laughed. "Not out here they ain't. Law's what we say it is in Copper Ridge." He moved closer, his hand resting on his own gun. "Now I suggest you finish your drink and ride out. There's no Mary here." Sophia felt cold fear creeping up her spine, but she maintained her composure. They had expected resistance, but the open hostility and the deputy's words confirmed their suspicions. The local law was complicit in the trafficking. Jacob drained his whiskey and set the glass down with deliberate care. "We'll be staying the night. Long ride back to Riverton tomorrow." "Ain't no hotel here," the deputy said. "The general store owner mentioned rooms for rent above his shop," Sophia replied, though no such conversation had occurred. The lie hung in the air, a test to see how much the men knew about their arrival. The deputy's eyes narrowed slightly. "Jenkins don't rent rooms," he said, "but Widow Carson takes boarders. End of the street, blue cabin." He smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Sweet dreams, sister. Lock your door tonight. Men get lonely in mining towns." Outside, in the fading afternoon light, Jacob guided Sophia quickly toward the indicated cabin. "That was a mistake," he muttered. "They're suspicious now." "But we confirmed the women are here," Sophia replied, "and that the law is protecting the operation." Jacob nodded grimly. "We need to find this Widow Carson. If she takes boarders, she might know where the women are kept." The blue cabin at the end of the street was small but well-maintained, with curtains in the windows and a small garden patch, signs of feminine presence rare in mining camps. An older woman answered their knock, her weathered face cautious but not unfriendly. "Mrs. Carson?" Jacob asked. "We're looking for a room for the night." She hesitated, her eyes moving from Jacob to Sophia. "You're married?" "Siblings," Sophia corrected. "Traveling from Riverton. We were told you might have space." Something in Mrs. Carson's expression shifted, a subtle softening. "Come in, quickly," she said, opening the door wider. Once they were inside, she closed it firmly and lowered her voice. "You're not looking for a room. You're looking for the women, aren't you? Jacob and Sophia exchanged startled glances. How did you? Jacob began. Because you're not the first, Mrs. Carson interrupted. A man came through last month asking questions. He disappeared the same night. Her eyes were hard with fear and determination. Those poor girls are kept at the foreman's compound up the hill. 3 of them now. They call them wives, but everyone knows they were bought and paid for. Hope surged through Sophia. Are they guarded? Always. The foreman and his men. They're brought to town once a week for supplies. Never alone. She twisted her hands nervously. The deputy you met, Wade, he gets a cut of every sale. How do you know all this? Jacob asked. Mrs. Carson's face darkened. My daughter was taken 3 years ago, sold to a camp like this one in Nevada. I never saw her again. She met Jacob's gaze directly. I help when I can, but I'm just one old woman. You're brave, Sophia said, impulsively taking the woman's hand. And now you're not alone. As night fell, they formulated a plan. The mining foreman's compound was a quarter-mile up the hill, a large cabin surrounded by smaller buildings where the bought women were kept. According to Mrs. Carson, the foreman, a brutal man named Hollister, would be at the saloon until late, as was his custom every night. The guards are usually half drunk by midnight, she told them. There are always 2, but they're careless. Jacob was reluctant to involve Sophia directly in the rescue, but she insisted. Those women won't trust a strange man, she argued. But they'll trust me, especially when I tell them what happened to me. In the end, he grudgingly agreed, but with strict conditions. Sophia would remain hidden until he had neutralized the guards. She would then help gather the women while he secured their escape route. They set out just before midnight, moving silently through the darkness toward the foreman's compound. The main cabin was lit up, sounds of raucous laughter indicating that not everyone had gone to town for the evening. Behind it, 3 smaller cabins stood in a row, each with a single window glowing dimly. Jacob touched Sophia's arm, pointing to a tree line where she could conceal herself. I'll signal when it's clear, he whispered. She nodded, her heart pounding as she watched him fade into the shadows, moving with the silent grace of a predator. Minutes ticked by, agonizingly slow. She strained to see in the darkness, jumping at every sound. Suddenly there was a muffled thud from the direction of the guard's post. Then another. Silence followed, stretching long enough that Sophia began to worry. Had something gone wrong? Should she retreat to Mrs. Carson's? Just as she was about to move, Jacob's low whistle came from the darkness. She hurried forward, finding him standing over 2 unconscious men, their weapons removed. They'll be out for a while, he whispered, but we need to move quickly. Hollister and his men could return any time. Together, they approached the first of the small cabins. Jacob knocked softly, then called through the door, "We're here to help, Federal Marshal." After a moment, the door cracked open, revealing a terrified young woman with blonde hair. Her eyes widened at the sight of Sophia. "We're getting you out of here," Sophia said gently. "All of you. My name is Sophia Fletcher. I was taken just like you were." The young woman Emily, they would later learn, burst into tears. They said no one would ever come, that we belong to them now. "No one owns you," Jacob said firmly, "but we need to hurry." Within minutes, they had gathered all 3 women, Emily, Rachel, and Ginny. All had been purchased through Miller's network. All had been lured west with promises of marriage, and all had spent the last month being treated as property rather than people. "We have horses waiting beyond the ridge," Jacob told them. "We'll ride hard through the night, be in Riverton by morning." The escape was almost too easy. They made it to the horses without incident, helped the women mount, and set off into the darkness. Jacob led the way, Sophia bringing up the rear to ensure no one fell behind. The rescued women were shell-shocked but determined, following instructions without question. They had traveled perhaps 2 miles when Sophia heard the distant sound of hoofbeats behind them. "Jacob!" she called. "Riders coming!" He reined in, listening. His face hardened. "They've discovered the escape. We need to move faster." But faster wasn't possible in the darkness, not with 3 inexperienced riders. They pushed on as quickly as they dared, the sounds of pursuit growing steadily closer. "There's a ravine ahead," Jacob said, his voice tight. "We can defend it if necessary." The ravine provided some shelter, steep walls on either side, a narrow entrance that could be guarded. Jacob helped the women dismount, directing them to take cover behind large boulders. "Stay down, no matter what happens," he instructed. Then he turned to Sophia. "I need you to take this." He pressed a revolver into her hand. "If anything happens to me, get these women to Riverton. Sheriff Pearson will help you." Sophia gripped the gun, fear and determination warring inside her. "Nothing is going to happen to you." He held her gaze for a moment. In the moonlight, his expression was solemn, but there was something else there, something unspoken that made her breath catch. "Be ready," was all he said before taking position at the ravine entrance. The pursuing riders arrived minutes later, 6 of them, including the deputy and a large man Sophia assumed was Hollister, the foreman. They pulled up short when they spotted Jacob, his rifle aimed steadily. "That's far enough," Jacob called. Hollister laughed. "1 man against 6? You're either brave or stupid." "Federal Marshal Jacob O'Malley," Jacob replied, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "You're attempting to recapture free women. That's a federal offense." "They ain't free," Hollister snarled. "They're property. Paid good money for them." "The law disagrees," Jacob said. "Your operation is finished, Hollister. Miller's been arrested. His records are in federal hands. Every man who purchased a woman through his network is being hunted down." Uncertainty flickered across the men's faces, but Hollister wasn't deterred. "Don't matter. Law doesn't reach places like Copper Ridge. Now stand aside, or we'll move you." Sophia watched from her position, heart in her throat, as the standoff continued. The women huddled behind boulders, silent with fear. She knew Jacob wouldn't back down, and equally knew that 6 against 1 were impossible odds, no matter how skilled he was. She made her decision in an instant. Moving carefully between the rocks, she positioned herself where she could see the confrontation but remain hidden. She raised the revolver, steadying it with both hands the way Jacob had shown her during their journey. "Last chance to ride away," Jacob was saying. "Next man who moves gets a bullet." The deputy Wade laughed. "You can't shoot us all, Marshal." "He doesn't have to," Sophia called, stepping into view with the revolver trained on Hollister. "I'll take care of the rest." The men's heads whipped toward her, surprise evident on their faces. She kept her aim steady, though her heart was racing. "The woman from the saloon," Wade said incredulously. "The woman you thought was property," Sophia corrected. "There are 3 more behind me, all armed, all with very personal reasons to want you dead." It was a bluff. The rescued women had no weapons, but in the darkness, with nerves already rattled by Jacob's revelations about Miller, it was effective. Doubt crept into the pursuers' expressions. "You're outnumbered and surrounded," Jacob added smoothly, playing along. "Federal reinforcements are on their way to Copper Ridge. It's over." For a tense moment, it could have gone either way. Then one of Hollister's men turned his horse. "I didn't sign on for no federal charges," he muttered. Another followed, then another. Soon only Hollister and Wade remained, fury evident in their faces. "This isn't over," Hollister spat, but he too wheeled his horse around. "Copper Ridge takes care of its own." As they retreated into the darkness, Sophia's knees nearly buckled with relief. Jacob was at her side in an instant, steadying her. "That," he said with grudging admiration, "was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen." She managed a shaky smile. "I believe you once told me I bring out the reckless in you." Perhaps it's mutual. His hand lingered on her arm, warm and reassuring. We need to keep moving. They might come back with more men. They rode through the night, not daring to stop until the sun was well above the horizon and Riverton appeared in the distance. Only then did Sophia allow herself to truly believe they had succeeded. 3 women rescued. 3 lives reclaimed from bondage. It was just the beginning. The next month passed in a blur of activity. Federal marshals arrived in Riverton taking custody of Miller and his associates. The ledgers proved invaluable, leading to raids on similar operations across 3 territories. Jacob and Sophia continued their mission, traveling from camp to camp, town to town, freeing women who had been bought and sold. Word spread of their work. Some towns welcomed them as heroes. Others met them with hostility and threats. Twice they narrowly escaped ambushes. Once, Jacob took a bullet graze to his shoulder, protecting Sophia from an angry husband who didn't want to relinquish his purchased wife. Through it all, something grew between them, a partnership based on mutual respect that gradually deepened into something more. Jacob came to rely on Sophia's quick thinking and courage. She found strength in his unwavering moral compass and gentle protectiveness. They rarely spoke of what would happen when their mission ended. The future remained uncertain, hanging between them like an unasked question. By early autumn, they had tracked down every woman named in Miller's ledgers. Some chose to return east. Others, having found genuine connections despite their terrible beginnings, elected to stay with the men who had purchased them, but now on their own terms, as true wives rather than property. Each woman made her choice freely, and Jacob and Sophia supported whatever decision they made. Their final rescue brought them to a remote ranch in Wyoming Territory, where a young woman named Catherine had been sold to a widowed rancher with 3 small children. What they found surprised them both. Catherine met them at the door, a toddler on her hip and a smile on her face. "I've been expecting you," she said, inviting them in. Word travels, even out here. The marshal and the mail-order bride, freeing women across the West. Inside the comfortable ranch house, Catherine introduced them to her husband, Daniel, a soft-spoken man who looked mortified when Jacob explained their purpose. "I didn't know," he insisted, distress evident in his voice. "The broker in Cheyenne said she was a proper mail-order bride. I paid him a finder's fee, but I never thought—" He looked at Catherine with genuine anguish. "I would never have kept you against your will. Never." Catherine's face softened. "I know that, Daniel." She turned to Jacob and Sophia. "He's a good man. When I told him how I'd really come west, he offered to pay my way back east immediately. But by then—" She smiled, bouncing the child on her hip. "By then, I'd found something worth staying for." As they left the ranch that evening, Sophia was unusually quiet, lost in thought as they made camp for the night. "Penny for your thoughts," Jacob said, handing her a cup of coffee. She accepted it, watching the flames dance in their small campfire. "I was thinking about Catherine, how something good came from something terrible." Jacob nodded. "It happens sometimes, not often enough, but sometimes." "What happens now?" she asked, finally voicing the question that had hovered between them for weeks. "The women from Miller's ledgers have all been found. Your mission is complete." He was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "There are more ledgers, more operations like Miller's." He looked up at her. "The work isn't finished." "No," she agreed softly. "I suppose it isn't. But maybe—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Maybe we could find a home base, somewhere to return to between missions, somewhere that's ours." The word ours hung in the air between them, filled with meaning. Sophia's heart quickened. "What are you saying, Jacob?" He set his coffee aside and moved to sit beside her. "I'm saying that I never expected to find you, Sophia Fletcher. I never expected that cutting those ropes would change my life. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. I'm saying that I love you, that I want to build something with you, something that's about more than just the work we do. Tears sprang to Sophia's eyes, unexpected but welcome. I thought perhaps I was imagining it, she whispered. The way things have changed between us. Nothing imagined, he assured her, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face. Though I've tried to be professional, honorable. She laughed softly. Always so proper, Marshall O'Malley. Not always, he murmured. And then he was kissing her tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. His arms encircled her, strong and safe, and Sophia felt as if everything in her life, even the terrible parts, had led her to this moment, this man. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, Sophia. Be my partner in everything, not just this work. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes to all of it. They were married 2 weeks later in Riverton, with Sheriff Pearson officiating and his wife Martha beaming in the front row. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, attended by several of the women they had rescued who had settled nearby. As fall turned to winter, Jacob and Sophia established their home in a small cabin on the outskirts of Riverton, close enough to civilization for comfort, but with enough land for the horses they both loved and the garden Sophia planted in the spring. They continued their work with the federal marshals, but selectively now choosing missions that allowed them to return home regularly, building their life together in between fighting for others' freedom. On a warm summer evening a year after their first meeting, they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Sophia's hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, where their first child grew. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked, his arm around her shoulders. She smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I was thinking about how I came west looking for a husband who didn't exist. How I was treated like livestock, bought and sold without regard for my humanity." His arm tightened protectively around her, but she continued. "And then I found you a man who saw me as a person from the very first moment, who valued my strength instead of trying to break it." She turned to face him, cupping his cheek in her palm. "You didn't just buy my freedom, Jacob O'Malley. You helped me claim it for myself." He covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss to her palm. "You claimed more than your freedom, Sophia. You claimed your power. And in doing so, you changed not just your life, but the lives of dozens of women across the West." His eyes, warm with love and pride, met hers. "And you changed me, too." "For the better, I hope," she teased. "For the better," he agreed solemnly. "You made me see that justice isn't just about hunting down the guilty. It's about restoring what was taken: dignity, choice, future." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Sophia thought of how far she had come from that terrified woman bound in a wagon. She had been merchandise then, property to be sold to the highest bidder. Now she was a wife by choice, a mother to be, a woman with purpose and power. She had come west seeking a future and had found one beyond anything she could have imagined, not given to her by a husband, but built with her own hands alongside a man who saw her as his equal. The mail-order bride who was sold like livestock had claimed her freedom, her future, and her love. And in doing so, she had helped others do the same, creating a legacy that would ripple through the West for generations to come. In the growing darkness, Jacob's lips found hers in a tender kiss that held all the promise of their shared tomorrow. Sophia Fletcher O'Malley, once merchandise, now mistress of her own destiny, returned his kiss with the fierce joy of a woman who knew exactly how precious freedom could be.